It's time to start getting some of the young talent, the young players on TCU's offense and defense, some real live game reps. I'll talk about how they can do that practically and balance everything. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for listening or watching Locked On Horned Frogs. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also find us wherever podcasts are available, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. Thanks for joining the show today. We're going to talk about young talent here. And pretty much for this entire season, or not this entire season, but the last few weeks, a lot of you have been bringing up the question, okay, at what point do we start to give these young players more reps? So 2023 recruiting class that TCU brought in, according to 247 Sports, was the highest ranked recruiting class in the school's history. It was historically good. You also had a transfer class, and those guys have gotten more run, and it's been a mixed bag of results. But bottom line was TCU, it appeared on paper, did a nice job of bringing in talent in the offseason and stacking up talent in depth. But we haven't seen a lot of those guys on the field, especially some of the big names that we thought could be contributors before the season. And my answer to fans' concerns or your concerns about this has mainly been like, I would also like to see some young guys play, but I tend to defer to the coaching staff, one, because I'm not at practice every day. And so those guys are. I like to think that there's a good reason as to why these players are not playing. And then secondly, it's not like there's no rule against it, but you can't really practically like make wholesale changes where you're, swapping out ones and twos across the board. But I think sitting at 4-4 in the season, you have 4 games left, and there are still things to play for. I mean, you got to win 2 games to make the postseason. You have 2 big games against Texas and Oklahoma that if you somehow could pull off the upset, you're not going to be favored in those matchups. But if you could find a way to pull off the upset, it would be big, right? It would, those be statement victories. It would be a bright spot in what has been, for the most part, a pretty disappointing season to this point. You have games against Baylor and Texas Tech, and those are 2 schools that even when you've had down years in the past decade, you've had their number. Like they've found ways to beat Baylor. They found ways to beat Texas Tech. Those are schools that you're recruiting against, that you're competing against, that you're going to continue to compete against. And so beating them, especially I think beating Tech on the road on Thursday night, would be significant. That would be just great to keep that momentum going. And those are your 2 best chances. Those 2 games are your 2 best chances to win both and then make it to a bowl game. But a lot of the kind of big picture pie in the sky stuff that we talked about before the year, playoff contention, Big 12 championship, all that stuff is off the table. And so at this point, I'm kind of sitting here thinking, okay, for this coaching staff, what is there to lose? Like, I don't think they're as bad as they played against Kansas State, but you lost 41-3. So, like, how much worse could it be if you're going to play some of these young players? And so you're not going to take all the starters off the field and say, okay, let's just roll with a bunch of freshmen and sophomores and see what happens. But I think there are specific players that this is the time now to get them live game reps and to have coachable moments. I mean, yes, they're probably going to make some mental mistakes, but like have an opportunity in a game situation where you can be like, okay, this is what happened. You saw this now. Hopefully, you have a better feel for the speed of the game, how things move, just the organization of a Power 5 college football game, and we can build on that moving forward. So I'm going to give you 4 or 5 guys that I want to see get more reps as the season continues to progress along, and we get to the back portion of the schedule. And the first one is Cam Cook, and Cam Cook has gotten some opportunities this year. His stat line so far this season is 9 carries for 42 yards, no touchdowns, 4.5 yards per carry. He got some running against BYU. He got some carries against West Virginia, and I thought he did a nice job. And we're at the point now, like Amani Bailey was having a really good season. Things have sort of stalled out, mainly because the offensive line is just really struggling to block right now. But Cam was a guy that walked in and gave them a change of pace at times, looked explosive, and I would love to see him get some more carries. Trey Sanders has been someone they've it seems like they've found his role, which is mainly just going to be like short yardage situations and maybe giving Amani a spell on the occasional series. Trent Battle and Corey Wren are players that they have played at times. Battle's snap count has been pretty consistent from week to week. It seems like Corey Wren's snap count has sort of decreased as the season has gone on. But I think with all those guys, you kind of know what you got. I would like to see more from Trent Battle, but for whatever reason, the staff just doesn't get him out there and get him a ton of snaps, week in and week out. So freshman Cam Cook, he's had 8. I know he was banged up early in the year. He's had 8 weeks to kind of acclimate himself to this offense, to what they're doing, to the day to day schedule. Give him the opportunity to run. Like I know the O line's struggling, and that's going to make it hard for any running back. But can he find, an opening and bust through and use that explosiveness? Can he use this elusiveness to get some good yardage? Can he just get an understanding and a feel for what happens week in and week out with Power Five football and how beneficial that could be with you? Use him in the passing game. See what he does on a 3rd and 6. If he has have a blitz pickup, like those are things in the moment that are kind of nerve wracking because you're depending on him to make plays. But again, that is the point in the season that we're at. The next guy is someone that a lot of you have brought up and talked about, Cordell Russell. Cordell was really highly recruited out of high school, a very highly rated prospect, a 4-star player, in some instances even a 5-star player, depending on what recruiting service you look at. And Cordell has great physical gifts. I thought he could be someone in this receiver room where there was a lot of questions and not really one player that had emerged as the guy where he could make an impact, but that hasn't happened. And I know there's been, some reports and rumors about maybe him not completely understanding the playbook. He missed all of spring camp with a broken collarbone. But even if it's some really simple stuff, even if you just want to get him out there and hit him on a bubble screen or throw a fade pattern or let him run, the occasional go route, it doesn't have to be 20 or 30 snaps a game. And Cordell's gotten a few opportunities this year, at the end of games when things are sort of out of hand. But he's really athletic. He's got a big frame. And so give him an ability to go make a play. Like allow him to use that physicality that he has to go up and catch the football. And let's just sort of see where he's at. And with all these players, I think you can have a short leash. Like if they're not getting it, if they're not, playing, if they're not playing with max effort, if they're not understanding the plays, if it gets live and real and it's not happening, then you can pull them off on the next series and put someone in. But I'd like to see Cordell get a few opportunities late this season to show what he can do because I think he can be a big time player for this offense moving forward. I think the other part of this, especially with the skill position guys, and I know a lot of people will lament this and they'll be like, well, if this person doesn't want to be here, then they can just move on, or if after one season they're ready to move on, they can just move on. But the new world of college football, playing time is paramount. And so I'm not saying that anyone's going into the transfer portal, but I feel like if you have highly rated skill players that don't get opportunities, you're going to have to work really hard to communicate well with them and just keep them around, to be frank and honest about it, because we know that recruiting happens all throughout the season. It's not necessarily right, but these players know each other. A lot of them go to the same camps. A lot of them played in high school together or played in the DFW area, and so they know each other and they communicate. And there might be a player at I'm just throwing a school out as an example. Another school like Texas or something like that, that is in Cordell Russell's ear and is like, "Hey, you're not getting any opportunities there. Maybe you should come here." And that's just me speculating. That's not me reporting anything. I'm just talking about hypothetical examples that we know could happen. And I would hate to see. And listen, I'm not behind the scenes. I don't know all the things that are going on, but I would hate to see someone move on because they simply weren't getting an opportunity. And I understand it. Again, as I said earlier, I kind of defer to the coaching staff. But at the same time, I feel like now we're definitely at the place in the season where you at least have to allow these guys to get some chances and play and just see where they're at. If they make mistakes and if it doesn't work, then you can make those changes again. I'm not talking about switching out your entire offense and defense. We're just talking about specific position groups. I'd also love to see more from Marcus Deal, the defensive lineman from Garland, 4-star recruit come out of the high school, and he played some early in the season. He's recorded half a sack this year. That's his stat line. But great size, at 6'4" and 200, 285 was what he's listed out of high school. Not sure where he's at now since he's kind of been through the strength and conditioning program. But somebody just get some push there in the run game, or maybe get to the quarterback. D line really struggled last week against Kansas State, as did the entire defense at all three levels. But just give them a chance to go make some plays. And then Zach Chapman and Jonathan Bax are two guys that we heard about in the offseason as potentially like pass rushers, athletic players that could do some good things for this team. And we just haven't really seen them at all. And I think, like, I know they've played on special teams a little bit. But those are guys that, like, get them out there. See if with their explosiveness and their athleticism, they can make some plays. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to have some growing pains and some hiccups in the road, but and it hasn't been this way every week. But honestly, in comparison to last week, can it really be any worse? I know it always can be, but can it be worse than it was against Kansas State? Because that was a disaster in a lot of ways. Your team wasn't playing well, and you don't need to bench everybody. But I think it is time to start considering, okay, who are some of these, inexperienced players that we could at least make a priority to get them some reps, here towards the end of the season, allow them to hopefully make some plays for us, and then build on that and sell them on that going into next season. Okay, we saw what you could do. You carved yourself out a role for next year if you can come in and compete and go through the offseason program and have a great attitude and do a good job. And so reward these guys for what they've been through this season, practicing every week and trying to get on the field by giving them some opportunities to make plays during the game. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Big 12. What else happened across the league? There's some quarterback injuries that are making the Big 12 championship race really interesting. That and more coming up here on Lockdown Horned Frogs. Thank you to LinkedIn, one of our great sponsors. I did a recruiting segment on Monday talking about David Punch, Harker Heights, power forward coming over. LinkedIn brings you our recruiting coverage here on the Locked On Network, and they're also just a sponsor here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's the best place to find work. This. Everybody, if they need to find a job, if they want to see what's around, what's open, they're going to LinkedIn. LinkedIn.com/Locked On College. You can post your job for free. If you are hiring people or you own a small business, that is a high stakes wage. You're trying to find not only the right talent for your company, but people that fit in with, the culture of what you're doing, that understand, that get it, and that, want to help your company be successful. You want to put your workforce in the hands of folks that can do a good job. And that's why LinkedIn is the best place to go, because they can cast a wide net, right? I said it earlier. Everybody knows about LinkedIn. That's where they're going to find work. And then they have a lot of great tools like simple screening questions that allow you to narrow down the field. Okay, now I have a much smaller group of people that I can interview, talk to, research more, and find out who's going to be best for my job. You don't have to wade through thousands of applications and resumes. You can find the people you need to communicate with. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to, and they do it faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. LinkedIn.com/lockedoncollege. You can post that job for free. Thank you to LinkedIn for being a sponsor of the Locked On Network. What else happened across the Big 12 on this past Saturday of games? We'll talk about that here. We do this every week. It's our Big 12 whip around segment. And we'll start with Baylor and Cincinnati, an 11 a.m. game on ESPN Plus. Both these teams struggling. Baylor actually gets the victory 32-29. So they are now 3-4 overall and 2-2 in Big 12 play. Cincinnati 2-5 overall and 0-4 in Big 12 play. Blake Chapin had a nice day passing the football, 316 yards and 1 touchdown. Baylor didn't really run the ball at all in this game. And that's the narrative that I've seen from people that cover the team. They had 80 yards rushing on 28 attempts. They had 42 passing attempts. Blake Chapin, as I said earlier, 316 yards and 1 touchdown. Dominic Richardson was the Bears' leading rusher, 8 carries for 37 yards. Keytron Jackson, wide receiver for Baylor, had 5 catches for 130 yards on the day. And so for years, under Jeff Grimes and Dave Aranda, Baylor's been known for having a good offensive line, for wanting to be a physical team. I remember when Jeff Grimes came over from BYU, he said his mantra was RVO, reliable, violent offense, or repeatable, violent offense, maybe it was. But basic premise was we want to be good at everything we do, and we want to be physical and violent. And their O line this season is just really not getting it done. And so they did a lot of quick passing stuff with Cincinnati, forced a couple turnovers. Emory Jones, Cincinnati quarterback, did have 2 touchdown passes. And Corey Kiner had 129 yards rushing. Baylor defense struggling this year, which is pretty surprising given that Dave Aranda, has that defensive background, obviously. But neither of these teams, Cincinnati, it's been a tough transition for them. And I'm still very confused by the Scott Satterfield hire. Um, Luke Fickle moved on at really the wrong time for them because they were just jumping up to the Big 12. But Scott's not a guy that's just had a ton of success at the Power 5 level. So I didn't quite get that. And they're continuing to have a tough transition year in year one of his tenure, still winless in Big 12 play. Oklahoma State, they take down West Virginia 48-34. The Pokes continue to roll along. Ollie Gordon is the name to know for Oklahoma State. 29 carries, 282 yards, and 4 touchdowns. They have found a way to run the football. Ollie's got 816 yards on the season. They finally settled on a quarterback a few weeks back, Alan Bowman, who was at Texas Tech, and then he was at Michigan, and now Oklahoma State. But honestly, and Alan Bowman doesn't strike the fear of God in me, but it's been the running game that they figured out. And he's done a nice job of managing the football game. Again, like nobody seems to do a better job when his kind of job's on the line, back is against the wall, than Mike Gundy. They got destroyed by Jacksonville State earlier this year. They lost their Big 12 opener to Iowa State, I believe. And then since then, they have just been nails, winning games, scoring 48 points against the Mountaineers. And West Virginia starting to fade, 4-3 on the season, 2-2 in conference play. Garrett Green had 2 touchdowns and 1 pick. He also led the team in rushing with 117 yards on the ground. So Mountaineers have lost 2 in a row, lost a really tough game to Houston on a Hail Mary, and then lost that game to Oklahoma State. So it seems like they're, kind of surprise Cinderella run potentially to a Big 12 championship game is off the table now. And, TCU is obviously not a very good team either. So it's not like I can complain about that loss too much, but I can because that was a game that the Frogs should have won. And it's still frustrating. They couldn't find a way to beat West Virginia at home. And that was sort of the beginning of the end for this group, is they really haven't been able to recover from that other than that win against BYU a few weeks ago where they put up 44 points. Oklahoma, they escape with a 31-29 win over UCF. UCF is also winless in Big 12 play. Man, the Knights were right there. They had a 23-17 lead in the third quarter, and their defense kept getting stops, but their offense just could not score. Eventually, Oklahoma kind of took that game over, and they took a 31-23 lead, but then UCF came down and scored a touchdown to make it 31-29, just could not convert the 2-point conversion to tie up the ball game, and the onside kick failed. And so the Knights fall on the road. But John Rice Plumlee, the Knights starting quarterback, he was back. He made a difference. 16 of 30, 248 yards and 2 touchdowns. Dylan Gabriel ended up throwing for 3 scores, had 1 interception. Sooners looked like they kind of sleptwalked through that game, which I guess they're coming off the Red River rivalry, but they had the bye week in between, so you would think that they would have been, had more energy or played better, but it just didn't work out. But Drake Stoops had a big touchdown catch for the Sooners to finally take the lead, and then they didn't look back from there, getting a victory over Central Florida. BYU, they bounce back and take down Texas Tech 27-14. Cougars now 2-2 in Big 12 play. Red Raiders 3-5 in conference play, 3-5 overall, 2-3 in conference play. Jake Strong is really the story here. Freshman quarterback, he threw 3 interceptions. I'm not sure what the status of Baron Morton is and his shoulder injury, before that TCU game. But Strong is just really struggling to protect the football. And so Morton makes a huge difference if and when he can come back healthy. Texas Tech had huge expectations this year. Just hasn't worked out for the Red Raiders, but they've had quarterback injuries. Offensive line is still, a mess as it really has been since Matt Wells era, and then continuing since Joey McGuire took over. And yeah, BYU is one of those other teams I just can't really figure out. It just feels like the middle part of this conference is week to week. It's just all dependent on who's healthy, what's going on. But there's no dominant team outside of Oklahoma and Texas, which haven't necessarily been dominant, but they've at least been consistent week to week. Speaking of Texas, Longhorns, they win 31-24 over Houston. Houston got jobbed on a huge call. They had a 3rd and 1 inside the red zone. Looked like they obviously got a first down. It was called short of the first down marker on the field, and they reviewed it and they upheld that call, and they kept them, from converting a 4th down. And then Texas took the ball from there and won the football game. The other big story from this game, Quinn Ewers gets hurt. He's got an AC joint sprain. And so Steve Sarkisian said he would be out for a while. And it was Malik Murphy stepping in and taking over for Ewers when he got hurt, and not Arch Manning. Jonathan Brooks had 20 carries for 99 yards. Murphy will be the starter if Ewers can't go over the next few weeks. And then Arch Manning will also be ready if necessary, according to Steve Sarkisian. And Malik Murphy is sort of the guy that's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle in that quarterback room, but he's a former 4-star recruit. I mean, it's not like this is, a nobody of a player. He's talented. I'll be curious to see what kind of game plan Texas has for him when they have to use him. I imagine the game plan will be give the ball to Jonathan Brooks and let him run. And so that's your Big 12 whip around. That's what happened around the league this week. When we come back, we'll talk. I'll discuss your comments and questions from yesterday's show here on Locked On Horned Frogs. PrizePicks. I love PrizePicks. It's the best place to go for daily fantasy deals. They have a really cool promotion going on where they'll match your first deposit up to $100 if you use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege. I'll talk more about that in a bit here. But the great thing about PrizePicks, they have games that reset every day. And so you can make these picks really just based on like individual stat markers. So, will Kareem Hunt go over 40 yards in the football game? Will Patrick Mahomes throw for more than 2 touchdowns? Is Justin Herbert going to throw for 3 touchdowns this week? Is Dak Prescott going to throw for over 200 yards, coming off that bye week and continuing to play against the Los Angeles Rams this Sunday? Those are the kinds of bets that you can make on PrizePicks. They offer weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts. They have Taco Tuesday. If you're listening to this right now, PrizePicks, they'll discount select players and projections up to 25% off to provide even more value. PrizePicks reboot policy means your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured for NFL games and college football top 25 matchups. If you have a player that exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second half, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use the code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege. Use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match of $100. PrizePicks, the best place to go for daily fantasy games. prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege. So on Monday's show, I talked about just more about the team itself, where they are going to the bye week, specifically the job that Kendall Briles and Joe Gillespie have done as coordinators this year. Mr. Doug says, I believe last year was a byproduct of 40% of Gary Patterson's toughness and 40% of Sonny Dykes' new ideas. It seems like the GP DNA is gone, as are the blessings or kind of the luck from last season. This year's special teams, defense, and offense have all looked woeful at times. Yeah, it's been a very different season. I think last year, so much of that too was just they had a lot of experienced players that bought into what the new staff was saying, and they're also really talented. And honestly, after that that recruiting class of Max and Quentin and Kendre and those guys, there was a pretty big drop off in talent level, and I think you're starting to see some of that. And I also just feel like Sonny hasn't done a great job kind of managing this team at times. Blake Murphy says something is very off with this team. We've seen examples of that all season. Saturday was a different beast. Kansas State could have hung 60 on us. He thinks there's issues in the locker room, no fire, no leadership. I mean, yeah, we've talked about that all year. Like, it doesn't seem like there's someone who's been able to rally the team and been like, okay, like, let's stop this madness. Let's stop this downfall and move forward. And Saturday, they got behind early, and it just wasn't a recipe for success. But I don't know what the disconnect has been this season as far as leadership goes. I did mention yesterday, though, I think it's always easier to lead when you're winning. And that's not me, faulting anybody on the team. It's just, it is. Like, it's just the truth of it, right? Like, if you're winning games, yes, there are challenges with that too. Not reading your own headlines, reading the rat poison, as Nick Saban would say. But it's tough to keep the team motivated when you're not having success, and I think that's the big struggle that TCU is going through right now. Somebody, I think this is probably a K-State fan, but he said the Sonny Dykes cry about the refs or to the refs every game. I only mention that because that's something I've noticed, and there were shots of him complaining to the refs against K-State. And I'm not going to get too much into it because I've said this before. I think like personality with coaching really just comes down to whether you win or lose. Like if you win, it doesn't honestly matter what your personality is. People will spin it to be a positive thing. It's like when Gary Patterson was winning, his intensity was seen as a great thing. It was like he's just, he gets it. He's intense. He gets the best out of his guys. He's hard on them because he wants them to be successful, and it makes them better. And when they started losing, it was suddenly like that was a bad thing, and they needed a new voice in the locker room. And so I don't want to get too much into that. And Sonny Dykes has been criticized this year for his laid-back approach because they're losing, where last year that was something that I think a lot of people appreciated about him because they were winning games. It is a weird look, though, when you're getting beat week after week and you're complaining to the refs. I understand that's part of the coach's job to a certain extent. You have to lean on them. You have to make sure that they're seeing the things that you're seeing on the field. But maybe go talk to your team more. And that's sort of an unfair criticism because I don't, like, it's not like I'm watching a sideline game all the time. It just looks strange when, you're getting whipped on the field and you're just constantly kind of talking back and forth and having a discussion with the officials. We'll be back tomorrow with Matt Jennings. Locked on Horned Frogs is your team every day.